The little black girl knocked on the biker's motel door, saying her stepfather met a stranger behind the fuel tanks. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a warm, dusty afternoon at the Riverside Motel, a quiet and simple place where the hum of motorcycle engines blended with the usual noise of traffic. The sun had already started to dip low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Most of the bikers had parked their bikes and were enjoying a rare moment of rest after a long ride. It was supposed to be a peaceful stop on their way across the state, but everything changed in an instant. Out of nowhere, a small, frightened voice broke through the calm. A young girl, no older than 8 or 9, appeared in front of the motel door, her face streaked with tears and her clothes torn and dirty. She was barefoot, and her little feet were covered in dust, her eyes wide with fear. She ran up to the door, her breath shaky as she knocked, desperately seeking help. "Please, help me," she cried, looking up at the bikers gathered outside. "My stepfather met a stranger behind the fuel tanks." The bikers froze. It was clear from the look in her eyes that this wasn't some kind of harmless misunderstanding. There was something deeply wrong, and the urgency in her voice sent chills down their spines. The leader of the group, a grizzled man named Jack, stepped forward. His face, weathered by years of hard living, softened as he kneeled down to her level. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's going on? Tell me who did this," he asked, his voice steady but full of concern. The little girl looked up at him, her body trembling. "I tried to stop him," she said between sobs. "But he wouldn't listen. He took my brother. They're gone now." Jack's heart sank. It wasn't just about a meeting behind some fuel tanks. This was serious. Something was going on, something dangerous. He stood up quickly, turning to his fellow bikers. "Everyone, we need to move fast. This girl is in trouble, and so is her family." The other bikers immediately gathered around, each one assessing the situation. They knew that trouble like this was never simple. It often came with consequences, and not just for the people involved, but for everyone who tried to step in. But that didn't matter to them. They weren't the kind of people who turned away from someone in need. The girl continued to speak, her voice shaky but filled with raw fear. "He's gone to the old warehouse by the tracks," she said, pointing toward the far end of the parking lot. "He said he'd be back soon. I'm scared." Jack looked at his crew, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just some random kid looking for help. This was bigger. This was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Without another word, he motioned to his crew, and they sprang into action. The plan was simple: find the stepfather, find the girl's brother, and make sure no one got hurt in the process. But Jack knew this wasn't going to be a simple rescue. The stepfather was involved in something shady, and the stranger he met behind the fuel tanks? That was a whole different problem. Jack's mind raced as the bikers gathered their gear, their faces grim. They weren't just going after a dangerous man. They were about to walk into a situation where they might have to make decisions they wouldn't want to. And in a town like Riverside, where everyone knew everyone else's business, they couldn't afford to take chances. As the engines roared to life, Jack looked at the girl one last time. "Stay here," he told her, his voice soft but firm. "We'll be back with your brother." And with that, the bikers sped off into the night, the rumble of their engines echoing through the empty streets, leaving behind the uncertainty of what was to come. I apologize for the delay in the story's progress. The riders quickly sped off into the night, the roar of their engines echoing through the empty streets of Riverside. The little girl's desperate face remained etched in Jack's mind as they weaved through the quiet highway. The sense of urgency was thick in the air. Every second counted. They had no idea what they were walking into, but they couldn't back out now. Jack knew that. His crew knew that. They had a promise to keep, and they would keep it no matter what. The group of bikers led by Jack, nicknamed Hawk, rode with determination. The sun had long since disappeared beyond the horizon, and the streets were almost completely deserted. They turned onto County Road 14, the nearest route to the old warehouse the girl had mentioned. Jack's motorcycle roared like thunder, cutting through the night air, with his team close behind him. He glanced over his shoulder to check on the rest of the crew. Diesel, their biggest member, was riding close behind, his enormous frame giving off an intimidating presence. Clutch, the tactical mastermind, was navigating the route expertly, and Phantom, the youngest but the most intense, kept his eyes peeled for any signs of danger. They all knew that tonight, they weren't just going to a fight. They were heading into a potential war zone. The warehouse loomed ahead like a dark, silent monster waiting to strike. The old building was a place known to the locals, but it had long since been abandoned. No one had dared go near it in years. But now, it was the scene of something far worse than anyone could imagine. Jack's heart pounded as they neared the entrance. They slowed their bikes and began to pull off the main road, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The warehouse was isolated, surrounded by overgrown weeds and the rusted remains of old vehicles that hadn't seen movement in decades. The place was eerily quiet, only the sounds of their engines and the distant hum of the wind breaking the silence. "This is it," Jack said quietly, his voice low and steady. He was trying to remain calm, but he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They needed to move fast, and they needed to do it carefully. "Stay sharp," he continued. "No one moves in unless I say so." His team nodded in unison, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. The tension was thick. As they made their way toward the back of the warehouse, the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. He had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize when something was off, and everything about this felt wrong. As they reached the corner of the warehouse, they saw the faint glow of a dim light from inside. It was coming from a small crack in the old, dilapidated wooden door. Jack motioned for his crew to stop. He couldn't risk alerting anyone just yet. They needed a plan. He motioned for Clutch to come forward. Clutch was the strategist, the one who always knew what to do in a tense situation. Jack leaned in and whispered, "What do you think? Should we go in quietly, or do we make a scene?" Clutch looked around, and then back at Jack. "We go in quiet. We don't know how many are in there, but I'd bet it's more than just the stepdad." Jack nodded. He agreed. The element of surprise was their best option. The crew crouched low, moving like shadows, until they reached the entrance of the warehouse. Jack took a deep breath and, without another word, slowly pushed the door open. The sound of the rusty hinges creaked, cutting through the silence like a knife. Inside, the light flickered from an old lamp hanging near the corner, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. They could hear muffled voices, but they couldn't make out what was being said. Jack motioned for everyone to hold back and quietly signaled Phantom to scout ahead. Phantom, quick and agile, nodded and crept into the warehouse like a shadow. The minutes seemed to stretch as Jack and the crew waited, their hearts racing. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Phantom returned, his face grim. "There are two of them," he whispered. "The stepdad is talking to the stranger, but they don't seem to know we're here." Jack nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anger. "All right, we move in. Let's make sure we get her out of here safe." They moved into position, inching forward with the quiet precision of a well-trained unit. Jack's mind raced as they approached the scene. He could see the silhouette of the stepfather standing in the far corner, talking to someone who was hunched over, facing away from them. Jack's hand tightened around the grip of his motorcycle's handle, his thoughts focused. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. The bikers were about to do what they did best, protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The tension was unbearable, but Jack knew there was no turning back now. "I apologize for the delay in the action." As the bikers silently made their way into the warehouse, the atmosphere was tense, filled with anticipation. The dim light from the lamp cast long shadows across the cracked concrete floor, making everything feel more ominous. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as his crew moved with precision, silently creeping toward the stepfather and the mysterious stranger. Their breaths were shallow, their every movement calculated. Jack signaled for everyone to hold steady as they approached the corner of the room where the two men stood. The stepfather's voice was low, but his words were clear. "You know, I don't think she's going to be a problem anymore," the stepfather said, his voice dripping with malice. The stranger responded with a quiet chuckle. "I'll handle it from here. You've done enough." Jack clenched his fists. The rage inside him boiled over, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was bigger than just a man and a stranger. This was about protecting the little girl who had led them here. As Jack motioned for his crew to get ready, Phantom, still the quickest and most nimble, took the lead. He moved silently, staying close to the shadows, his eyes locked on the stepfather and the stranger. The tension was palpable, every second feeling like it could break at any moment. Phantom was in position. Jack's mind raced. "On my mark, we move," he whispered to his crew. They all nodded, eyes steely and focused. But just as Jack was about to give the signal, the stepfather turned his head sharply, as if he sensed something was off. "You sure you didn't hear something?" he asked, his voice suddenly full of suspicion. The stranger hesitated before replying. "No, just the wind. You know how it is." Jack's pulse quickened. They had to act now before they were discovered. With a quick gesture, he gave the signal. The bikers moved in unison, storming forward with the force of a freight train. Diesel, with his massive frame, was the first to enter the room, pushing the door open wide with a single swift motion. His powerful presence caught the stepfather and the stranger off guard. The stepfather immediately reached for his waistband, his eyes filled with panic. But before he could react, Jack was already there, his voice commanding and full of authority. "Drop it," Jack ordered, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. The stepfather froze, his hand still hovering over the weapon, but he didn't draw it. Jack stepped forward, his face inches from the man's. "You're not going to hurt anyone else. Not tonight." The stranger stood up slowly, his eyes darting between the bikers, calculating his next move. But Jack knew this was it. This was the moment where it all came to a head. "What's going on here?" Jack demanded, his voice booming through the warehouse. "Why were you talking to this man about her?" He pointed toward the little girl's brother, who was tied up and scared, his wide eyes staring in horror at the scene unfolding before him. The stepfather's face turned red with anger. "I didn't do anything wrong," he shouted, his voice trembling. "She's just a kid. I'm trying to protect her from something far worse." But Jack wasn't buying it. He wasn't here to listen to lies. "Don't make excuses," Jack growled. "You put that kid in danger. You've been threatening her and her brother, and we won't let you get away with it." The stranger, still standing in the corner, finally spoke up. "You should just walk away," he said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you." Jack's eyes locked onto the stranger. "You're not getting away with this." As Jack advanced, the stranger reached into his coat, but Jack was faster. In one swift motion, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it until the stranger dropped the gun. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. The bikers moved in, surrounding the stepfather and the stranger, their faces hard and unforgiving. The girl's brother was still tied up in the corner, but his eyes now held a glimmer of hope. "We're taking you in," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. The stepfather's face contorted in rage, but he didn't move. He knew he had lost. There was no way out now. As the bikers secured the two men, Jack turned to Phantom. "Get the boy and the girl. Get them out of here." Phantom nodded and rushed to untie the boy. Jack stayed with the two men, his eyes never leaving them. "You're going to face justice for what you've done. This ends now." The bikers started to escort the stepfather and the stranger toward the exit, and Jack felt a small sense of relief. But it wasn't over. Not yet. They still had to get the kids out of here safely, and that meant making sure there were no more surprises. As the bikers made their way back toward the parking lot, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than they had uncovered. But for now, the children were safe, and that was all that mattered. "I apologize for the tension earlier, but things were far from over." The bikers had just secured the stepfather and the stranger, but Jack knew they weren't out of danger yet. As they made their way out of the warehouse, a sense of unease hung in the air. The little boy, now free from his restraints, clung to Jack's side, his small hand trembling. The girl, despite her tear-streaked face, stood tall next to Diesel, her protector for the moment. She looked up at him, eyes wide with gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Diesel nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. "We're not done yet," Jack said softly, his eyes scanning the surroundings, looking for any signs of danger. He wasn't convinced that this was over, not by a long shot. "We need to get out of here now." The night had fallen into a deep silence. The bikers led the children to their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life one by one. The sound of the bikes was a small comfort in the tense atmosphere, the only thing breaking the eerie quiet. Jack glanced back at the warehouse once more before mounting his Harley. Everyone stay close, he ordered, his voice firm. We don't know if they have backup, and we're not taking chances. The crew nodded, moving in formation as they began to ride out of the warehouse parking lot. The children were safely between them, surrounded by the bikers who wouldn't let anything happen to them. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As they rode down the dark highway, Jack's mind raced. The stepfather and the stranger had been involved in something bigger, something that didn't sit right. There had to be more to the story than just a random kidnapping attempt. Jack's instincts were telling him that they had just scratched the surface. What's next? Diesel asked, pulling up beside Jack as they cruised through the quiet streets of Riverside. Do we take them to a safe house, or? Jack cut him off. We take them home first. They need to see their mother, make sure she's okay. After that, we figure out who else is involved. The bikers were heading toward the girl and boy's house, a small, modest place on the outskirts of town. Jack had promised the girl's father, Tyrone, that he would protect his kids no matter what, and now, with the girl and her brother safe, that promise had to be honored. As they neared the house, Jack could see the porch light flickering in the distance. It looked like a safe haven in the middle of a storm. But when they pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The house was dark, the windows eerily silent. Jack stopped his bike, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. Where's their mother? He muttered under his breath. Diesel dismounted first and approached the door, knocking loudly. No answer. Jack's gut tightened. He could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier by the second. They had just dealt with a dangerous stepfather and an even more mysterious stranger, and now this? Stay close, Jack ordered as he walked to the door. We need to check inside. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence. The house was eerily still, too still. The air inside felt thick, like it had been trapped for too long. The living room, dimly lit by a single lamp, looked untouched, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. Mom, Jack called, his voice echoing through the house. The children stayed close to him, their eyes wide with fear. Jack's heart pounded as he made his way through the house. He checked each room, moving cautiously, his instincts on high alert. As he reached the kitchen, his eyes landed on something that made his stomach drop, an empty bottle of pills on the counter. Jack's eyes darted around the room. There was no sign of their mother. His worst fear had come true. She wasn't here. He turned back to the kids, his face grim. Where did your mom go? The girl, her voice trembling, looked up at him. She was really sick. She said she needed medicine, but she hasn't been able to get any. She said she would be back soon. Jack's mind raced. The woman had been struggling, but where was she now? Had someone taken her? Had the stepfather known this? Jack's gut told him that everything about this situation was connected. Somehow the mother's disappearance, the stepfather's actions, and the stranger were all part of a much larger, more dangerous game. He turned back to his crew. We need to find her. Now. Jack's voice was hard, filled with resolve. Stay close, stay sharp. We're not leaving until we have all the answers. The bikers nodded, and together they began their search for the mother, hoping they weren't too late. But with every passing minute, the urgency grew. Who was behind this, and what were they trying to cover up? Jack wasn't sure, but he was ready to find out. And when he did, there would be no turning back. I apologize for the tension that lingered, but things were getting darker as Jack and his crew searched the house. The empty pill bottle on the counter had confirmed his worst fear. Something was terribly wrong. The mother was gone. The house, once filled with the sounds of family, now felt like a shell, hollow and silent. The kids were huddled close to Jack, their eyes wide with fear, their breath shallow. The girl's face, still streaked with tears, looked up at him. What's happening? Where's my mom? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't have an answer for her, at least not one that would make her feel better. He glanced over at Diesel, who was checking the back door. We need to get out of here and find her. This isn't just a missing person. There's something else going on, something bigger than we realize. Diesel nodded. He had a way of seeing the bigger picture. You think someone took her, Jack? He asked. Jack didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure who had taken her, but he knew one thing for certain. It wasn't a coincidence. The stepfather, the stranger, and now the missing mother, it all connected somehow. Jack's eyes flicked toward the kids. They needed to know they were safe, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were still in danger. The bikers gathered in the living room, eyes scanning the surroundings. The air was thick with tension. The girl and her brother stayed close to Jack, but he knew they needed answers. "Stay close," he said to them. "We're going to find your mom, okay? I promise." The little boy, looking up at Jack with wide, trusting eyes, nodded. "Thank you," he whispered. It was the first time Jack had seen him smile, even a little. It was a small comfort in the midst of everything. Jack turned to the rest of the crew. "We need to hit the streets. Fast. There's no telling where she could be, but we have to find her before it's too late." The bikers immediately grabbed their helmets and jackets, ready to follow Jack's lead. They moved out of the house quickly, making sure to leave no trace that they had been there. The streetlights flickered as they made their way down the empty road. Jack's mind raced as they rode. Where could the mother have gone? And why hadn't the stepfather said anything? The bikers' motorcycles rumbled through the night, the sound of their engines breaking the silence. As they rode through Riverside, Jack's thoughts were focused on the mission ahead. The whole town seemed eerily quiet. It felt like everyone was hiding something. Jack kept his eyes peeled as they made their way to the nearest gas station. Maybe someone there had seen something. Maybe they could get a clue. They stopped at the gas station, the low hum of the lights casting shadows across the parking lot. Jack dismounted his bike and walked toward the counter. Behind the register stood a man in his mid-30s, wearing a worn-out baseball cap. He looked up as Jack approached. "Can I help you?" he asked. Jack leaned in, his voice low. "Have you seen anyone unusual around here lately? Someone may be looking for trouble." The man squinted at Jack for a moment before shaking his head. "No, I haven't seen anything like that. Just the usual crowd." Jack didn't buy it. He knew there was something more going on. He pushed further. "What about a woman? A woman who might have been in trouble?" The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Actually, yeah. A woman came in a few hours ago. She looked really shaken, like she'd been through something. She didn't say much, just bought some gas and left. She was headed toward the old bridge on Highway 30. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The old bridge. It was a place that had been abandoned for years. Nobody went there unless they had a reason. Did she look like she was being followed? Jack asked. The man shrugged. Hard to say. I wasn't paying attention, but she seemed in a hurry. That was all Jack needed. He turned to Diesel. We need to get to Highway 30 now. The bikers immediately mounted their bikes, revving the engines and speeding off into the night. Jack's thoughts raced as they made their way to the bridge. The air grew colder as they approached the area. The old bridge loomed ahead, its rusted frame barely visible in the darkness. The bikers stopped just before the bridge, scanning the area. Jack dismounted his bike, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. There, in the distance, he saw a figure standing near the edge of the bridge. It was the woman. Her back was turned, but Jack could feel the tension in the air. They were getting closer. Jack motioned for the bikers to move in slowly. They didn't want to spook her, but they couldn't afford to take chances. As they approached, Jack called out, "Hey!" The woman turned, and for a split second, Jack thought he saw recognition in her eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by fear. "Please, I need help," she said, her voice shaky. Jack moved closer. "Are you okay?" he asked. The woman looked around nervously, as if she were being watched. "I can't go back," she whispered. "They're after me. They've been watching me for weeks." Jack's heart raced. This was it. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. The woman wasn't just lost. She was being hunted. And now, so were they. I apologize for the tension that still lingered in the air. The woman standing on the bridge, her face a mix of fear and desperation, had just confirmed what Jack had feared the most. This wasn't just about a missing person. It was bigger than that. She wasn't just hiding. She was running for her life. Her eyes darted nervously between Jack and the rest of the crew. The bikers, who had stopped a few feet behind, watched her closely, knowing better than to rush in without understanding the full picture. Jack stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. "What happened?" he asked softly, his voice calm but insistent. The woman took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly. They've been after me for weeks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first, I thought it was just random. But then, I realized, they're part of something bigger, something dangerous." Jack's heart began to race as he processed her words. Dangerous? This wasn't just some personal vendetta. She was talking about a bigger organization. "Who are they?" Jack pressed, taking another step closer. The woman glanced over her shoulder again, her eyes wide with fear. I can't tell you everything, she said, her voice trembling. But I know they're connected to the man you brought in, the stepfather. He's not who he says he is. He's part of something much darker. Jack looked over at Diesel, who was still on his bike, watching the woman with a steady, calculating gaze. Jack nodded subtly, and Diesel rode up closer. The woman's eyes flickered toward him, but then returned to Jack. I don't know how far they've gone, but they'll do anything to keep me from talking. I'm not the only one they've targeted. There are others. Jack's got twisted. This was no longer just about protecting the kids or the mother. This was something that threatened more than just their little town. What do you mean, others? Jack asked, his voice firm now. They've done this before. The woman hesitated. Yes, she whispered, looking over her shoulder again. People have gone missing. People who know too much. They've been watching me for a while, but I finally figured it out. And now, they know I know. Jack's eyes narrowed. He felt a deep sense of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He had to get this woman to safety, but he couldn't do it alone. He turned to his crew. We need to move, now? We can't let them get to her first. Without hesitation, the bikers began preparing for the next phase of the plan. Diesel, Clutch, and Phantom began scanning the area, making sure they weren't being followed. Jack kept his focus on the woman, his voice low but urgent. You need to trust us. We're going to get you out of here, but you have to tell us everything you know. We need to be prepared for what's coming. She nodded, her eyes still wide with fear. I'll tell you what I know, she said quietly. But you need to hurry. They'll be coming for me. Jack nodded in agreement. The urgency in her voice sent a chill through him. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a race against time. The woman explained as they rode, her voice trembling as she spoke. I don't know exactly who's in charge, but I know they've been using the warehouses near the tracks to store things. Bad things. Weapons, documents. They're not just after me. They've been tracking other people, too. I tried to get away, but they've got eyes everywhere. Jack listened carefully, his mind working quickly. He had to keep her safe, and they had to figure out who was pulling the strings behind this operation. The sound of the bikes echoed through the night as they rode toward the warehouses. The closer they got, the more Jack's senses went on high alert. They could be walking right into the lion's den. They approached the first warehouse cautiously, Jack signaling for the bikers to spread out. Diesel and Clutch stayed on the bikes, ready to move quickly if needed. Jack walked with the woman, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The warehouse was an imposing structure, long abandoned and barely standing, but it served as the perfect place to hide. Jack's instincts told him that this was the heart of whatever operation the stepfather and his mysterious partners were running. As they neared the entrance, the woman stopped and grabbed Jack's arm. We can't just walk in there, she said, panic rising in her voice. They'll be waiting for us. Jack turned to her, his face calm but serious. We're not walking in there. We're taking them down. He glanced back at his crew, who were now positioned around the warehouse, watching for any movement. We're getting you out of here. But first, we need answers. The woman nodded, looking more terrified than ever. Jack's mind raced as he came up with a plan. He couldn't risk walking in there blind. He needed to gather intel first. Phantom, Jack whispered, go around back. See if you can find another way in. We need to know what we're dealing with before we move in. Phantom nodded and disappeared into the shadows. Jack turned back to the woman. Stay close. We're not letting you out of our sight. The seconds ticked by slowly as they waited for Phantom's report. Jack's gut was telling him that time was running out. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that the people they were up against would realize they were coming for them. But Jack wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. I apologize for the growing tension as the minutes dragged on. Jack's mind raced as he stood near the warehouse, his thoughts focused on the woman who had just revealed so much. The situation was escalating faster than he had anticipated. Phantom was out there somewhere, circling the back of the warehouse, gathering intel. The woman clung to Jack's side, her hands shaking as she looked around nervously. Jack could tell that the weight of everything was starting to break her, and he hated seeing it. She had already been through so much, but now, the stakes were even higher. He had to protect her, and he couldn't afford any mistakes. The silence of the night was broken only by the soft hum of the motorcycles and the distant sound of a dog barking in the neighborhood. Jack's crew was in position, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. Everything felt too quiet, too still. That's when it happened. Phantom's voice crackled through the radio, a whisper just audible enough for Jack to hear. I found something. There's a side entrance. It's locked, but it looks like someone's been in and out. I've got eyes on it. Should I move in? Jack didn't hesitate. Yes. Get in there and let us know what you find. Stay quiet, and don't engage unless necessary. Phantom acknowledged the command and moved into the shadows. Jack turned to his crew. We move in once Phantom gives the signal. We're not going to rush this. We need to be smart. Diesel, Clutch, and the rest of the bikers nodded, each of them preparing for what was coming next. The tension in the air was palpable, the threat of what they were up against growing with every passing second. Jack kept his eyes on the woman. She was scared, no doubt, but there was something else in her eyes now, a glimmer of hope. She had trusted them with her life, and Jack wasn't going to let her down. As Phantom's report came in, Jack's heart skipped a beat. I'm inside. There's a hallway leading to what looks like a back office. I can hear voices, but I can't make out what they're saying yet. I'll wait until they move, then I'll get closer. Jack took a deep breath. Everything depended on Phantom's ability to stay hidden. He looked at the woman. You're going to be okay. We're getting you out of here. She nodded, but Jack could see the fear still in her eyes. He knew that words wouldn't fix everything. Action would. Phantom's voice came again, this time a little more urgent. They're moving. 2 men. One of them is the stepfather. He's with someone else. Looks like they're about to meet with someone. There's a heavy bag on the floor. Could be weapons. Jack's gut tightened. This wasn't just a kidnapping operation. It was a full-blown criminal enterprise, and the stakes were much higher than he had imagined. Get out of there, Phantom. We're going in. Without waiting for a response, Jack gave the signal. The bikers moved quickly, their bikes roaring to life as they positioned themselves around the warehouse. Jack's mind raced as they advanced. Phantom had confirmed what they feared. The people behind all of this were well-organized and dangerous. Jack wasn't going to let them get away with it. The bikers approached the warehouse cautiously, their senses heightened. Jack motioned for Diesel to lead the way, knowing his massive frame and strength would be crucial if things turned violent. They approached the side entrance Phantom had found, carefully checking for any signs of guards or additional threats. Jack's hand tightened around the grip of his motorcycle as he prepared for the worst. They had made it this far, but they still didn't know what awaited them inside. Phantom's voice crackled again. The meeting's happening. They're talking. I can't hear everything, but they're discussing something about the kids. They know we're onto them. Jack cursed under his breath. We need to move now. They were running out of time. The bikers surged forward, with Jack leading the charge. They reached the side entrance, and Jack pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with tension, the faint sound of voices drifting from deeper within. They moved stealthily, each step calculated, every breath held as they made their way down the hallway Phantom had described. The voices grew louder as they neared the back office. Jack signaled for the crew to stop. He could hear the stepfather's voice now, muffled but clear. It's too late, he was saying. They're already onto us. They'll be here any minute. Jack motioned for Diesel to take the lead. They were close now, so close to finally bringing these men to justice. Diesel nodded and moved toward the office door, his muscles tensed, ready for anything. Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had to end this now. They couldn't let these men hurt anyone else. With a quick nod, Diesel kicked open the door, and the bikers stormed in. The stepfather and his partner looked up in shock, their hands reaching for weapons, but it was too late. The bikers were already there. Jack moved in first, his voice firm. You're done. No more hiding. The stepfather looked panicked, his eyes darting to the stranger beside him. The stranger reached for his gun, but Jack was faster. He knocked the gun from his hand before the man could even aim. You're going to tell me everything, Jack said, his voice cold. The stranger's face turned white as Jack and Diesel closed in. The stepfather, still stunned by the sudden assault, didn't move. His eyes flickered to the woman, standing by Jack's side, and that was all it took. The truth was out. They weren't dealing with just a kidnapping. They were dealing with a ruthless operation, one that was far more dangerous than anyone could have ever imagined. I apologize for the chaos that erupted in the room as the bikers stormed in. The moment they kicked open the door, everything shifted. The stepfather and the stranger froze, their eyes wide with shock and panic. The strangers had no idea who they were dealing with. Jack moved swiftly, his presence commanding as he took control of the situation. "You're done," Jack said coldly, his voice firm and unwavering. The stepfather tried to speak, his voice trembling as he stammered, "You don't know what you're getting into." Jack didn't waste time with words. He knew this man had been a part of something far bigger than a simple kidnapping, and he wasn't going to let him get away with it. Diesel stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the stepfather. His face was expressionless, but the muscles in his arms were coiled tight, ready for anything. The stranger tried to make a move, reaching for the gun on the table beside him, but Jack was faster. With one fluid motion, he knocked the gun away and kicked it across the room. "You're not going anywhere," Jack said, his eyes locked on the stranger, who now looked completely defeated. "Tell me who's behind this, and I'll make sure you both make it out of here alive." The stranger looked between Jack and Diesel, his breath coming in short gasps. He was clearly terrified, but Jack wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "I don't know who you think you are," the stepfather finally said, his voice shaking, "but you're messing with people you don't understand." Jack stepped closer, his face just inches from the stepfather's. "I don't care who you're working for. What I care about is making sure that those kids are safe. And that means you're going to talk. Now." The stranger, visibly sweating, took a step back, his eyes darting to the door. "We've been trying to clean up our mess," he muttered, his voice low. "But you've got no idea what you're up against." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Who are you working for?" The stranger looked down, his eyes avoiding Jack's gaze. "I can't," he whispered. "If I tell you, they'll kill me. They'll come after my family." Jack gripped the stranger's arm, pulling him back toward the center of the room. "You have two choices. You talk to me now, or we let the authorities handle this, and I can guarantee you won't make it out of this situation alive. Which one sounds better to you?" The stranger's eyes flickered with uncertainty before he finally broke. All right, he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't know the whole operation, but I know enough. There's a man, his name is Dalton. He's the one behind all this. He's the one who called the shots, and he's the one who wants to silence anyone who knows too much." Jack's grip tightened. "Dalton? Where is he?" The stranger shook his head. "I don't know. He keeps everything on lockdown. We never meet in the same place twice. But he's got connections everywhere. Police, politicians, you name it. You won't find him easily." Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just some random operation. This was organized crime on a whole new level. Dalton was no small player. And if what the stranger was saying was true, this operation had deep roots in the town. It was going to be harder to take down than Jack had initially thought. He turned to Diesel, who was standing just behind him, his arms crossed over his chest. "We need to find Dalton. Now." Diesel nodded, his expression grim. "I'll start looking into his connections. We'll find a way to track him down." Jack turned back to the stranger. "You're coming with us," he said. "You're going to help us bring him down." The stranger opened his mouth to protest, but Jack silenced him with a glare. "You're going to do this whether you like it or not. And if you think you can double-cross us, remember, you won't be dealing with the authorities. You'll be dealing with me." The stepfather, who had been standing silently in the corner, now spoke up, his voice tinged with desperation. "You don't understand," he said, his eyes darting nervously. "Dalton has people everywhere. If you go after him, you'll be dead before you even get close." Jack's expression hardened. "Then I guess I'll die fighting. But I'm not backing down now. We're going after Dalton, and we're going to end this. For good." With that, the crew began to make their way out of the warehouse. The stranger, now reluctantly following them, had a look of defeat in his eyes. He knew this wasn't going to end well for him, but at least now he had a chance. The bikers moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the surroundings as they headed back to their bikes. The woman and the children were still waiting, and Jack wasn't going to let anything happen to them. He had a promise to keep, and that meant taking down Dalton and his entire operation. As the bikers mounted their bikes and revved the engines, Jack felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. But he wasn't about to back down. The night was far from over, and the fight was just beginning. I apologize for the heaviness of the moment, but things had escalated faster than Jack expected. The weight of the situation grew with each passing second. As the bikers roared down the highway, Jack's mind raced. The truth was starting to unravel, and with every new piece of information, the danger was becoming clearer. Dalton was the key to everything, and Jack had to find him before the operation grew even bigger. The crew stayed close, their engines roaring as they cut through the night. Jack glanced back at the woman and the kids, who were tucked safely behind him. The little boy was clinging to his sister, his face pale, but with a quiet sense of relief. Jack had promised to protect them, and he wasn't about to break that promise. As they approached the outskirts of town, Jack's thoughts drifted to what the stranger had said. Dalton was powerful, more so than anyone had realized. He wasn't just some local thug. He was connected, had ties everywhere. The more Jack thought about it, the more he realized how deeply the corruption ran. The bikers pulled into a small, run-down diner, a place they'd frequented many times. The neon sign flickered above the door as they dismounted their bikes. Jack's eyes scanned the diner, looking for any signs of danger. He knew they couldn't let their guard down yet. Diesel, Phantom, and Clutch took up positions around the diner while Jack stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and the waitress behind the counter looked up, a tired smile on her face. "What can I get ya, hon?" she asked, but her eyes quickly darted to the group of bikers outside. Jack didn't have time for pleasantries. "We need information," he said, his voice low. "Have you seen anyone come through here lately? Anyone who might be connected to Dalton?" The waitress hesitated, her eyes flickering nervously. She knew something. Jack could see it in her eyes. He leaned in closer. "You know who Dalton is, don't you?" She looked over her shoulder, making sure no one was listening, then nodded slowly. "I know who he is. People like him don't come through here often, but when they do, it's always bad news. I saw him a few weeks ago, with a few men. They were talking about things. Dangerous things." Jack's pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" The waitress glanced toward the door again, her face full of fear. "I didn't hear much, but they were talking about shipments. Guns, drugs. The kind of stuff you don't want to know about." Jack's mind was racing. "Did you see where they went?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I heard them talking about meeting at the old factory. You know the one. The one just off Route 30. Jack's eyes narrowed. The old factory. It had been abandoned for years, just sitting there in plain sight, no one ever giving it a second thought. But now, it seemed like it was a key location in this operation. Jack stood up, his mind focused. "We need to go. Get back to the bikes. Now." The bikers gathered quickly, their faces set in determination. They didn't speak, each one knowing what needed to be done. As they mounted their bikes and revved the engines, Jack glanced at the woman and the kids. "Stay close. We're going to the factory." The ride to the factory was tense. Jack's thoughts kept returning to the words of the waitress. Guns, drugs, and Dalton's name kept echoing in his mind. This was bigger than just a missing person. This was organized crime at its worst, and it was all connected to the people who had been pulling the strings in Riverside. As they neared the factory, the mood shifted. The area was dark, and the factory loomed ahead, its rusted frame casting long, jagged shadows. Jack could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. They were getting close to something dangerous. They stopped just before the entrance, the engines of their bikes cutting out one by one. Jack's eyes scanned the area. There were no lights, no movement. It was eerily quiet. "Everyone, stay sharp," Jack ordered. The bikers formed a tight circle around the woman and the kids, protecting them from any potential danger. Jack and Diesel moved forward, creeping toward the factory entrance. They moved like shadows, their boots making almost no noise against the cracked pavement. The factory door was slightly ajar, the dim light from the outside barely illuminating the interior. Jack pushed it open slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the smell of stale air and rust hit him immediately. It was a large space, filled with old machinery and discarded crates. But it wasn't empty. Jack could hear voices, low murmurs, the unmistakable sound of a conversation taking place. He signaled for the others to stay behind. "Phantom, get in position. We need to know who's in there," Jack whispered. Phantom, ever the silent operative, nodded and slipped off into the shadows. Jack's focus was razor-sharp now. The stakes were higher than ever. They were in the lion's den, and Dalton's people were close. This was it. The moment everything would either come together or fall apart. As Phantom gave the signal that he was in position, Jack motioned for the rest of the bikers to move in. The time had come. The confrontation with Dalton and his men was about to begin. "I apologize for the heavy weight of the situation." As Jack and his crew silently moved into the factory, every step felt like it could be their last. The air was thick with tension, the darkness inside the factory making every shadow seem like a potential threat. Jack motioned for the team to stay close, his instincts telling him that the worst was yet to come. Phantom had already found a spot to watch the situation unfold, his eyes sharp as ever. Jack's heart raced as they crept through the building. The low murmur of voices grew louder, and with it, the realization that they were close. Too close to the heart of this operation. "We need to move quickly," Jack whispered to Diesel, who nodded in response. Diesel's massive frame was an imposing figure in the darkness, but he moved like a shadow, silent and deadly. The two of them inched closer to the sound of the voices. They reached a corner and slowly peeked around it. The scene before them was like something out of a nightmare. There were several men gathered around a makeshift table, papers scattered across it. Jack's eyes immediately went to the man standing at the head of the table, the one who seemed to be calling the shots. It was Dalton. His face was familiar to Jack now, thanks to the stranger's description. Jack's grip tightened on the handle of his knife. This was it. The man who had been pulling the strings in Riverside and beyond. Dalton was the key to everything. He had to go down. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what needed to be done next. He motioned for Diesel to follow him as they silently moved closer, but just as they were about to make their move, one of Dalton's men turned. His eyes locked onto Jack for a split second, and in that instant, everything fell apart. "You," the man shouted. "There. Here. Get them." The entire room exploded into chaos. Men jumped up, reaching for weapons, scrambling for cover. Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled out his gun and fired, the sound of the shot ringing through the factory. It wasn't a kill shot. He didn't want to start an all-out gunfight, but it was enough to send the men scattering. "Move," Jack shouted, and the bikers surged into the room, their own weapons drawn, ready for anything. The first man lunged at Jack, but Diesel was faster. He slammed the man into a stack of crates, knocking him out cold. The rest of the crew moved in, taking down the remaining men with swift precision. Jack kept his focus on Dalton, who was now backing away toward the rear of the factory, his eyes wild with panic. "You're not getting away," Jack said, his voice cold. He moved toward Dalton, every step bringing him closer to the man who had caused so much pain. But as Jack closed in, Dalton made a desperate move. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small device. "Don't come any closer," Dalton shouted, his voice shaking. "I'll press it. I'll blow us all to hell." Jack's eyes widened as he saw the device, an old-fashioned detonator. Dalton was holding a bomb. Jack froze, realizing the stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level. If Dalton pressed that button, everyone in the factory would be dead. The woman, the children, his crew, all of them. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't afford to take any chances. "Put it down, Dalton," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This ends now." Dalton was sweating, his hand shaking as he held the detonator in front of him. "You don't understand," he hissed. "This isn't just about me. It's bigger than you. Bigger than all of you. You have no idea what you've walked into." Jack took another step closer, his gun trained on Dalton's hand. "You're not going to get away with this. You're not going to hurt anyone else." Dalton's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he might actually back down. But then, the door at the back of the factory burst open, and more men flooded into the room. The bikers quickly turned, taking up defensive positions, but Jack knew this was their moment. He had to act fast. "No more running, Dalton," Jack said, his voice a low growl. "You're done." Without warning, Jack lunged forward, knocking Dalton's hand away from the detonator. The two men struggled for a moment, but Jack's years of experience gave him the upper hand. He twisted Dalton's arm, forcing him to drop the device. It clattered to the floor, harmless. Jack quickly secured Dalton, handcuffing him before turning back to his crew. "It's over," Jack said, his voice filled with relief. The factory was now in their control. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. They had taken down Dalton, but there was still a lot of work to be done. The biker crew began to round up the remaining men, securing them for the authorities. Jack walked over to the woman, who was standing by the entrance, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. "It's over," Jack said, offering her a reassuring smile. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Jack nodded, but his mind was already shifting to what came next. Dalton had been taken down, but there were still more unanswered questions. Jack wasn't about to stop until the whole operation was dismantled. He looked at his crew, his brothers, and nodded. Let's get the hell out of here. They'd won the battle, but the war was far from over. I apologize for the tension that still hung in the air as Jack and his crew left the factory, their bikes rumbling as they rode through the dark streets of Riverside. The factory was now under control, and Dalton had been taken down, but there was still the lingering question of what came next. Jack's mind raced as they made their way back to the outskirts of town. The woman and her children were now safe, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. Dalton was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. They had taken down a major player, but Jack knew there were still others out there who could cause just as much harm. The bikers rode in silence, each of them reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Diesel, as always, was at the front of the pack, his massive frame leading the way. Clutch and Phantom followed closely behind, each of them keeping their eyes peeled for any sign of trouble. Jack stayed close to the woman and the kids, making sure they were safe. The streets of Riverside were quiet as they approached the outskirts, the occasional streetlight casting long shadows across the road. Jack glanced at the woman, who was sitting behind him on his bike, her face a mix of exhaustion and relief. The kids were close by, still clinging to each other, but at least they were safe for now. You're safe now, Jack said, his voice calm but firm. The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come. Jack didn't respond immediately. He wasn't used to praise. Protecting people, especially kids, was just what he did. But he couldn't deny the sense of satisfaction that came with knowing they had stopped something dangerous. They made their way toward the safe house, a small, secluded place just outside town where they could regroup and plan their next steps. Jack had promised to keep the woman and her children safe, and he wasn't about to break that promise. As they approached the safe house, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They still didn't know who was behind Dalton or what else was at stake. They had made progress, but Jack knew it would take more than just taking down one man to bring this operation to an end. The crew dismounted their bikes, their boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Jack turned to Diesel, who was already scanning the area for any signs of danger. We need to stay vigilant, Jack said, his voice low. We don't know if Dalton was acting alone, or if there are more people involved. We need to figure out who else is pulling the strings. Diesel nodded, his face grim. We'll find them. We just need to be patient. Jack walked over to the woman and her children, his eyes softening as he spoke. You're safe here. Get some rest. We'll take care of the rest. The woman nodded, but Jack could see the weariness in her eyes. It had been a long night, and they had all been through so much. The children, too, were exhausted, their faces still pale from the fear they had endured. Jack watched as they entered the safe house, the door closing behind them. For a moment, he stood outside, taking a deep breath. He couldn't let his guard down. There was still too much left to do. He turned back to his crew, his mind racing. Let's check the intel we've gathered so far. We need to make sure we didn't miss anything. Clutch, who had been quiet throughout the ride, spoke up. We've got Dalton, but we still don't know who his contacts are. We need to hit the streets tomorrow, see what we can dig up. Jack nodded. Agreed. But we need to be careful. We don't know who we're dealing with yet. As the bikers gathered inside the safe house, Jack's thoughts continued to race. They had made it this far, but the real battle was still ahead. They needed to find the people behind Dalton, the ones pulling the strings, and take them down before more lives were lost. Jack wasn't going to stop until this was over, until everyone involved in this operation was brought to justice. He couldn't afford to lose anyone else. The crew set up a small operations center inside the safe house, using the intel they had gathered so far. Jack spread out the maps and notes on the table, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The woman and the children were safe for now, but Jack couldn't rest until they had completely dismantled the operation. As the night wore on, the bikers went over the information, each of them offering suggestions on how to proceed. But Jack's focus never wavered. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to stop until it was fulfilled. The next morning, the crew prepared to hit the streets once again. They weren't just going after Dalton anymore. They were going after everyone who had been a part of this operation, and they weren't going to stop until they brought them all down. I apologize for the weight of the situation as it continued to unfold. The morning light filtered through the blinds of the safe house, casting long shadows across the room where Jack and his crew were gathered. The plans they had laid out the night before now felt even more urgent. They had taken down Dalton, but Jack knew that this was only the beginning. There were still others out there, pulling the strings and keeping the operation alive. They couldn't afford to wait. Jack stood at the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the maps and intel spread across the table. The crew was already preparing for the next move. Diesel, Clutch, and Phantom were scanning through the information they had gathered from Dalton's operation, trying to find any leads that could help them track down the rest of the network. "We need to move fast," Jack said, his voice steady. "We don't know who Dalton was working with, and if there's anyone else in charge, we need to find them before they can do any more damage." Diesel nodded, his expression grim. "Agreed. We've got the pieces, but we need to figure out how they all fit together. There's still a lot we don't know about who's backing Dalton." Clutch, who had been silently going through a stack of papers, looked up. "There's one lead we haven't followed up on. One of Dalton's contacts was involved in some shady real estate deals. There's a property out on the edge of town, near the old refinery. It's been kept off the books, but it looks like it might be a front for something bigger." Jack's eyes narrowed. "The refinery. That's where they're hiding everything." He turned to the crew. "We need to hit that location now. If there's anything hidden there, we'll find it." The crew quickly assembled, ready to move. Jack glanced over at the woman and her children, who were still staying at the safe house. They had been through so much already, and Jack wasn't about to put them in harm's way again. "Stay here," he said gently, looking at the woman. "We'll take care of this. You're safe for now." She nodded, her face weary but grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack's heart clenched as he turned away, the weight of his promise pressing on him. He couldn't let anything happen to her or her kids. The bikers revved their engines as they made their way to the old refinery. It wasn't far, but the closer they got, the more Jack's senses were on high alert. The area was eerily quiet, with the abandoned structures looming ahead like forgotten giants. Jack knew they were close to uncovering something big. As they reached the perimeter of the refinery, they slowed their bikes, moving cautiously. Jack gestured for the crew to spread out. "Stay in pairs," he instructed. "We don't know what we're walking into, so stay sharp." Diesel and Phantom moved to the left, while Clutch and Jack took the right. The air was thick with the smell of rust and oil, the remnants of a once bustling industrial site, now abandoned and forgotten. But Jack knew that what was hidden here could change everything. They approached the main building, which was covered in overgrown vines and grime. The windows were cracked, but the door was intact. Jack reached for the handle, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark interior. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty space as they moved inside. Jack's hand tightened around his weapon. He could feel the danger closing in, but he couldn't let fear take hold. They had a job to do. As they moved deeper into the building, the silence was broken by a faint sound coming from the back. Jack motioned for the crew to stop, his senses on high alert. "There's someone back there," he whispered. They crept forward, staying in the shadows, careful not to alert whoever was inside. The closer they got, the louder the voices became. Jack's heart raced. "It's them," he muttered under his breath. "Dalton's people." He signaled for the crew to take positions. "We go in fast." No hesitation. They moved in unison, bursting into the room where the voices were coming from. The men inside froze, clearly caught off guard. Jack's eyes immediately landed on the man standing at the far end of the room. It was a familiar face, someone who had been working with Dalton. He didn't recognize the others, but they were armed and dangerous. "Get on the ground," Jack shouted, his voice commanding. The men hesitated for a split second, but that was all it took. Jack moved quickly, his crew following suit. The bikers disarmed the men with precision, forcing them onto the floor. One of the men tried to make a move, reaching for a gun, but Diesel was on him in a heartbeat, pinning him to the ground. "No more games," Jack said, his voice cold. "You're going to talk. We need to know everything about this operation." The man who had been standing at the back stood up slowly, his hands raised. "You think you've won? Dalton's just one piece of the puzzle. There's much more going on. Here, you can't stop us." Jack stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the man's. "You're going to tell me everything you know, and you're going to do it now." The man swallowed, looking between Jack and the rest of the crew. He knew the game was up. "All right," he muttered. "I'll talk." Jack nodded. his mind already racing with what was to come next. They had just taken down another key player, but the real mastermind was still out there. And Jack wasn't going to stop until he brought them all down. I apologize for the weight of what was unfolding as Jack and his crew stood in the heart of the refinery, the tension palpable in the air. They had just taken down another key figure in this operation, but there was still one more to find, the mastermind behind everything. The man they had captured was on his knees, hands bound behind his back, his face covered in sweat and fear. Jack was done with the games. "You're going to tell me everything," Jack said, his voice cutting through the silence. The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Jack and the rest of the crew. He knew his time was running out. "I don't know what else you want," the man muttered. "Dalton was just a pawn. There's someone above him, someone bigger, someone who's been running everything from behind the scenes." Jack stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Who? Who's behind all of this?" The man hesitated, his lips trembling. "You won't be able to get to him. He's got people everywhere, even in the police, in the government. You think you've won? You don't even know the half of it." Jack's jaw tightened. "I don't care about your threats. Who is he? Tell me now." The man took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the decision. Finally, his eyes locked onto Jack's. "His name is Victor Hayes. He's untouchable. You'll never get close to him. He's too powerful." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Victor Hayes. The name carried weight. He knew it, but he couldn't quite place it. He turned to Diesel, his mind racing. "We need everything on him. Now." Diesel nodded, pulling out his phone and immediately starting to search for any information. Meanwhile, the other bikers kept their eyes on the captured men, making sure they weren't going anywhere. Jack turned back to the man, his face hard. "You're done. You're going to rot in prison for the rest of your life." The man didn't respond, but the defiance in his eyes told Jack everything. This wasn't just about him. Victor Hayes was the real enemy. Jack's mind was already spinning. He had to find this man. He had to end this for good. Diesel came back with information that made Jack's stomach turn. "Victor Hayes," Diesel said, his voice low. "He's not just some local criminal. He's connected to a massive network that stretches all the way to the top. Law enforcement, politicians, hell, even some corporate figures. This goes way beyond Riverside." Jack clenched his fists. This wasn't just about protecting the woman and her children anymore. This was about taking down an empire. And Jack wasn't going to back down. He turned to his crew, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We're going after Hayes. We take him down, and we end this once and for all." The bikers all nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They knew what they were up against. They had already faced the danger head-on, but this was different. This was the final battle. Jack had made a promise, and he wasn't going to let it go unfulfilled. "Stay close," Jack said, looking at the woman and her children. "We're going to get you to safety, and once this is over, you won't have to worry about him anymore." The woman nodded, her face filled with gratitude but still clouded by the fear of what was to come. Jack's heart ached for her. She had been through so much, and now it was his job to make sure she never had to face this kind of fear again. As they mounted their bikes and rode off, the weight of the mission hung heavy in the air. The road ahead was uncertain, and the risks were higher than ever, but Jack knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't stop until Victor Hayes was brought down. The ride through the streets was fast, the roar of the motorcycles cutting through the night. The town was eerily quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what would come next. Hayes had the power, the influence, but Jack had something that Hayes didn't, loyalty. Jack's crew was with him, and they were willing to do whatever it took to end this. As they neared their destination, a place where Hayes was rumored to be hiding out, the air grew heavier, the sense of danger closing in. They reached a secluded building on the edge of town, the lights dim, and the silence oppressive. Jack stopped his bike and looked around. This was it. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. "Get ready," Jack said, his voice low. "We move in fast. No hesitation." The bikers nodded, checking their weapons, preparing for the confrontation they knew was coming. As they moved toward the building, Jack's senses were on high alert. He could feel the danger, the weight of everything that had led them here. This was their final showdown with Victor Hayes. And Jack wasn't about to let him slip away. They reached the door, and Jack motioned for the crew to stay quiet. They pushed the door open slowly, the sound of the hinges creaking in the stillness. The building was dimly lit, and the air felt thick with tension. Jack's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of Hayes. And then, there he was, Victor Hayes, standing in the center of the room, his face calm but filled with disdain. He wasn't surprised to see them. He had been expecting this moment. Jack's heart raced as he stepped forward, his gun raised. "This ends tonight, Hayes," Jack said, his voice cold. Hayes smirked. "You really think you can stop me?" he sneered. "You're too late." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, but then, the room exploded into chaos. Men rushed out from the shadows, guns drawn, but Jack and his crew were faster. The bikers moved with precision, taking down the men one by one. Jack's focus never wavered. He had one goal, Hayes. Hayes took a step back, his smirk gone, replaced by panic. Jack moved forward, closing the distance. "You've lost," Jack said. Hayes's eyes widened as Jack's hand closed around his arm, twisting it and forcing him to the ground. The rest of the bikers finished securing the remaining men. Jack stood over Hayes, breathing hard. "It's over," he said. Hayes's eyes flickered with defeat. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "This is just the beginning." Jack didn't care. Hayes was done. The operation was dismantled. Jack had kept his promise, and the town of Riverside was finally free. I apologize for the intense action that unfolds in this thrilling tale of vengeance and justice. Follow the journey as a group of bikers known for their fierce loyalty and protective nature dive into a web of corruption, crime, and danger in this heart-pounding ride. As the Hell Angels stories unfold, one biker in particular takes the lead, unraveling a dangerous network linked to powerful people who have terrorized an innocent family. From their dramatic confrontation at a local factory to the discovery of a master criminal named Victor Hayes, this story dives deep into the heart of a criminal empire. The bikers, led by a strong, determined protagonist, face down ruthless criminals, risking everything to ensure the safety of those who have suffered at the hands of corrupt forces. As the tension escalates and their resolve strengthens, the Hell Angel stories show how far loyalty and determination can push a group of people to fight back against impossible odds. Join this high-stakes journey where every decision counts, and every moment is charged with danger. In the end, only one question remains. Will justice prevail, or will these Hell Angels stories spiral into deeper chaos? If you're a fan of action-packed, high-octane drama, you won't want to miss these intense chapters that keep you on the edge of your seat. The Hell Angels stories offer a glimpse into a world where loyalty, justice, and violence collide, offering a thrilling conclusion that promises a fresh twist on classic biker sagas.